Hello, my friends, and welcome back to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning. I am so glad you're joining me today for another conversation. Today, we're talking about siblings, the often overlooked members of neurodivergent families who are watching, interpreting, and trying to understand what's happening around them. When one child in a family is neurodivergent, has differences in the way they think and learn, parents often focus understandably on assessments, supports, and advocacy for that child. But there's often another child or children quietly observing everything, noticing differences, trying to make sense of behaviors, wondering what it all means, and sometimes asking questions adults don't feel prepared to answer. Joining me today is Dr. Liz Angoff. She's a licensed educational psychologist, diplomate in school neuropsychology, and author of the brain building books and Our Brains. She specializes in helping children understand and advocate for their unique brains. I'm excited to be discussing how to talk to siblings about neurodiversity, when to share a diagnosis, and how to answer all their questions. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Angoff back to the podcast.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Dr. Liz, welcome back.
Thank you for having me. It's so fun to be back on the podcast.
I know, and I was saying before we hit record that it's been almost 2 years, if not over 2 years. So the time just flies by so quickly.
It's amazing.
Yes, and the last time you were here, we were discussing the importance of sharing assessment results with the young people after they complete the evaluation. And that was a while back. And I started following some of the things that you've been writing about siblings. And I thought, I need to have her back to have this conversation because it's such an important topic. So I want to thank you for sitting down with me again.
Of course. I think this is a huge topic because just talking to kids in general about the diagnostic world, I think is pretty revolutionary that we're bringing kids into the conversation. And then as soon as we have the conversation with the kid, the next question I get from parents is, okay, but what about their sibling? Like, what do we tell the rest of the family?
Yes. And that's so important because, when we do these assessments, obviously we're sharing the evaluation results with parents. We're sharing it with the kiddos who spend, hours with us doing these evaluations. And I often see siblings trying to fill in the blanks when adults don't explain what's going on. And parents, like you said, are seeking, how do I talk to the siblings about what's happening? And you often talk about kids are, meaning makers. They want to figure out what's going on. And if you don't give them accurate information, as you know, they create their own explanations as to what's going on with my brother or my sister.
Exactly. So in talking to kids directly, that's what we're trying to do is really get a hold of that narrative that they're naturally creating and making sure that it is a positive and empowering narrative. And so often, so many adults I've talked to in their own journey around understanding themselves, understanding their brains, it starts with this I'm less than, I'm broken narrative. And so when the whole impetus behind talking to kids early is that we are shifting that narrative to my brain's built differently. And, and that's what makes it amazing. But you're right that the siblings are watching and they have their own narratives. And there is a lot of literature out there about how siblings are really affected by the trials and tribulations that their family goes through in trying to figure out what's going on for their sibling, supporting their sibling. And then often the sibling story is something like, why am I not important enough? Or why does why does the other kid get all the attention? Or what's wrong with them? These kind of, or they'll develop a narrative again that's inaccurate. It's unhelpful. It's unhelpful for their sibling, but it's also unhelpful for them as they're trying to figure out what's my role in this family and how do all the pieces go together.
Absolutely. And you talk about how these differences in the way brains are wired, which, we talk about all the time, can be interpreted by siblings as unfairness. And, then they start to be concerned about themselves. And that's why it's so important to include them in the conversation, because they're seeing and they're hearing and they're putting all these pieces together, and all those pieces may not be being put together in the right way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And one of I think the striking ideas that you talk about is that before explaining a diagnosis to siblings, that parents should actually ask the neurodivergent child for permission to share. And that's such a powerful respect-based approach. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So, when I work with families in my practice, the main focus of the assessment work is to help kids understand their brains. And so they've done all of this work and they're really developing ownership over their narrative. And it's such an important concept for the empowerment piece. And one of the things that we tell them is you own this information, you own your narrative. And so if you, as we start sharing it with other folks, including the school or doctors, we want to make sure that you're with us and that you understand kind of why we're collaborating. And if you have any trepidation about sharing that with, people who should be on your team and on your construction crew, as we describe them, then we want to know why and what that's about so that we can really make sure that we're including all the people that are most important on the team. And so the very first piece when we think about talking to siblings is to say, okay, now that you understand your brain, child, it could be really, really helpful for your sibling to understand what's going on, so that they can really understand you and that they can be part of your construction crew, that they can help you build your brain. And the reality is so that you're not fighting so much, so that there's not so much tension in the house, so that when you need things, you can get what you need, but also so that your sibling can get what they need. And we want to all get on the same page. And so we think it could be really, really helpful, but we want to make sure that this is your story that you get to tell. So, now that you understand more about your brain, what do you think would be most helpful for your sibling to understand? And that most helpful piece is important because it gives them control to say, like, this is the thing I want my sibling to know. It's also inviting it as a positive thing, that this is going to be helpful. We're using that word helpful because it's going to be helpful, right? Like, what do you think would be most helpful? And it could be something very small and concrete. Like, I need my sister to understand that shelf in our room is for my toys, that I need my own space. Great. Let's start there because apparently that's something that's very, very important. Or it could be as big as I want, my brother to understand that I'm autistic because maybe he'll lay off me a little bit more, right? And give me a little bit more space. And so it really helps us understand. It gives, like you said, it's a respect-based approach. And so we're giving kids control over their own narrative and their own identity. And then we are also getting a sense of what is most important to them, that their sibling understand. What are the issues that are coming up that are most salient and would make the biggest difference for them if their sibling had a little bit more understanding?
Right. And that feels like it's such a powerful shift for that child, for that young person, because psychologically they're feeling empowered. They're building agency. It's like this self-advocacy piece. And it's also protective because they're having some say in what is being disclosed and to whom.
Right. And I think it gives us bite-sized pieces to share with the sibling because often with siblings, we're also talking about young kids. and explaining very complicated concepts to another young child, especially if it's a younger sibling, but even older siblings. An older sibling might be the ripe old age of 8. And so we are explaining these things, and it helps us to remember, like, oh, they need something that is concrete, tangible, and part of their everyday real life experience. And so probably when our kiddo says, I just need them to give me my own shelf in our bedroom, that is going to be a very appropriately sized piece for the sibling, because apparently that's what they're fighting over all the time.
So you talked about this complex language and breaking down the complex task of doing an assessment and understanding a child's unique learning profile. And one of the things I love about your work is that you help to make that complex process and understanding manageable to understand for young kids. And I love the highways and construction projects metaphor that you use to explain strengths and challenges. So do you use that same metaphor when talking to siblings?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk to kids directly about their brains and what we learned about their brains through the assessment process, we'll talk about their how their brain works through these cells called neurons, which connect to each other like tiny billions of tiny roads in their head. And some of those roads are like highways. The highways are the things that you do really well, things that you've worked really hard on. And then there are things in your brain that are under construction. So these are the things that you're still working on. And we talk to kids a lot about the things that they've already built so that they understand that their brain is dynamic and something that's constantly building and growing. And so using the same framework and the same language that we got in working with the child themselves to explain it to their sibling keeps everybody on the same page.
Yes, using the same language. Yes.
Yeah. So when we talk to the sibling, having that language becomes really, really helpful. And so it might sound something like, sitting down with a sibling, and it might be, again, we're asking consent from the child themselves. So you might say, do you want to be there when I explain this to your brother or sister? Or do you want me to just have that conversation with them on their own? And so however it lands, I might say something to the sibling like, you know how you've been saying how frustrating it is to play with your brother or sister sometimes? Well, we learn some things about how their brain works that may be helpful for understanding what's going on and how we can help you both so that it's not so hard. So then we say to the sibling, we can think of our brains as under construction, both your brain and your sibling's brain. This means all brains have highways, the things we do well, and construction projects, the things that we're building. And so for your sibling, we learned that they have lots of strengths. I think you already know a lot of these. They're creative, they're curious. What else? Tell me some more things that you appreciate about your sibling or that you see as their strengths. And we're going to make a big list of those things. Like, yes, you know your sibling so well. And these are some other things that we noticed that when they went to all those doctor's appointments, this is what the doctor noticed. We notice all these things. We also notice that there is a couple things that have been really challenging for your sibling, and those are their construction projects. And these are things that they're working on harder than most kids. And usually here, I might think about one or two things that the sibling is well aware of. So one example with the shelf might be something like one construction project that your sibling's working on is something called flexibility. So they work best when things are the same and have a hard time when things aren't as expected, like if your toy shows up on their shelf. And so we call that flexibility, or we call that, like needing to know what to expect. And that's the construction project that they're working on. And so does that make sense to you? Is that something you've experienced? And then we might say something like, it turns out that lots of kids have highways and construction projects just like your sibling. And we have a special name for that kind of brain. We call this autism, or we call it ADHD. And we learn that your sibling has a special kind of brain with a special name. And that's going to really help us understand. So for example, for your brother, being autistic means that he's curious and does best when things are the same. And he said that one way you can help him is by having that shelf all to himself so that he knows what to expect when he walks into your room. So, and then we could say, would that work for you? Do you have any questions about that? But we're sharing this little bit that's going to help the sibling understand, like, oh, okay, my brother's brain is wired differently, or my sibling, my sister kind of has a different way of thinking about things. And here's something that I can do that's going to be really helpful for that.
Right. And it gives that sibling the opportunity to be helpful with this new information, having this new information. And I love that you're starting with something that they already notice. It's like now that's where they're being inquisitive. Now I understand why she does that, or why he reacts that way. And it seems like it would have the impact of reducing blame between siblings as well.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I've seen, is that it brings that understanding, and then we're reducing blame. I think really asking, like, does that make sense to you? And would that work for you? Is also empowering the sibling to say, actually, no, it doesn't work for me. Like, it's so confusing. I don't know where my, brother's spaces are, or where my spaces are. Like, okay, well, let's work through that so it works for you too. Because we want to be really careful. We're walking the line here of helping siblings understand their diagnosed sibling, without making them feel like it's their responsibility to take care of everything, that they are not, just as important, that their challenges and their construction projects aren't just as important as their siblings. We want to make sure that they are also empowered with this information, that it's working for them, and that we're using this information to figure out a way that things work for every member of the family.
Right. And as you described, again, the construction zones and the highways, and talk about everybody has things that they need to work on, and everybody has some things that are easier for them and they don't have to work as hard at those things. It normalizes that experience for siblings as well.
Exactly. And, one of the things we talk about when we're introducing a diagnosis is, some types of brains have a name. And, for the kids who have gone through the assessment process and do have a diagnosis, we can say that, your brain has a special name. For siblings, we might say something like, like your brain, we could describe your brain, if they are neurotypical, and say, we could describe your brain as a neurotypical brain. And that means you still have highways and construction projects you're working on, but the world is built in a way that tends to be a better match for the things that you're working on. So so some things may feel a little bit easier, or it might be easier for us to help you with your construction projects. So we're not denying that there are challenges and that they're still there. But we're pointing out that things for the diagnosed sibling might be a little bit more challenging. And of course, if the sibling also has a diagnosis, it's a great time to play compare contrast and be like your highways are this, and your siblings are this, and your construction projects are this. And we can, kind of have a common way of talking about everything that's going on in our family.
And you've also discussed some real questions children have asked for learning about a sibling's diagnosis, including, whether they themselves are autistic, or whether meltdowns are their faults. And why does she get more attention than I do? It's an opportunity to answer some of those questions as well.
Yeah. So kids have lots of questions, sometimes implied, sometimes they just ask them flat out. I think it's really important to know that siblings are going to ask questions the same way that our kids are going to be getting little bits of understanding along the way and may come out with a question 5 months down the road that you're like, oh, okay, we're revisiting that conversation. They're constantly processing, and then all of a sudden it comes out one day because they had some kind of experience. Siblings may have questions straight away, or it might come in a heated moment of, why are you giving him so much more attention than me? But recognizing that, okay, this is my other child or my other children's way of processing and understanding, and just taking that opportunity to validate, I think another question has come up. And this is a really important question. And so for some of us, it might mean, I'm going to think about this and come back to you so I can just gather my thoughts and figure out how I'm going to explain this to you. And then really validating that feeling that the siblings have and being very transparent and open in your answers. And so for, one question I get a lot from siblings is, oh, my sibling's autistic, my sibling has ADHD, my sibling's dyslexic. Is that me too? And so I might say something like, well, you have a really cool kind of brain also with your own highways and construction projects. Your brain's not an autistic brain, or it's not an ADHD brain, but we can describe your brain as blank. And so maybe there's a diagnosis there that they already know about, or maybe they have a neurotypical brain. And as I said before, that means your brain's built in a way that's a pretty good match for what the world expects you to do and learn. So we kind of know more about how to help you with your construction projects, and we're still learning how to help your sibling with theirs. But this is the kind of brain that you have, and here's some language for your brain. Kids also, ask, a huge one is, why do they get more attention than I get? And why do you care more about them than you care about me? And this is one that breaks our hearts as parents, because of course we care so much about both of our children. But often, especially when we're in the middle of the diagnostic phase, we're just figuring out what's going on with the child who was struggling more. And so a lot of our attention is indeed going there. And so it's really important to validate that, to say, right now, I know it feels like most of my attention is on your sibling. And that's something that is necessary right now because we're figuring out how to best help. But I need you to know that while my attention is not 50-50 all the time, my love is always 100-100. And I want to brainstorm with you some ways that we can have special time, that we can make sure that you feel that 100% love, because it's not okay that you're not feeling that. But I do need to put more attention on your brother right now or on your sister right now because they're going through this hard time. It won't be forever, but this is something that there's two things going on here. There's my attention, there's my love. And I want to be more intentional about that. So we're going to figure that out together.
Right. And when you do that, you don't dismiss their feelings, you validate their feelings. You also let them know that you want to make that time for them as well. And it feels like that statement about, equal love is such a regulating emotional statement for them as well.
Yeah. I think it keeps us on point as parents too. It's like, oh yeah, we gotta find that time, or like figure out how, we're going to make sure that both my kids are getting what they need, because we do get into that as parents. When there is a crisis, we get into put out fire mode. And I think it's really helpful. We can see it as really helpful when kids are asking these questions, even if it's in a moment of a meltdown. That it's like, oh yeah, okay, we got to figure out what the balance is going to be. And I'm so glad you asked that question. I'm so glad you told me. And that in itself can be a moment of really showing that, like, how much love you have for that child, and to make sure that they are really, constantly feeling that, even when we're put out fire mode.
And it's during the assessment process, and often right after as well, when sometimes the kiddos who do these evaluations with us have more therapies that they didn't have before. And so parents are having to spend extra time doing those things. And so to let the sibling know for now, we need to do these things to help your sibling, but you are very important to me. And I want to make sure that we're carving out some time for you as well. I think that can be reassuring.
Yeah. And I think going through this process to give the sibling a story that is accurate and transparent is part of why, that's why we're doing this, so that their narrative is not, I'm less important, but it's, I'm equally important and my sibling needs a little bit more right now.
Yes. Another moment that families often struggle with is, particularly when you're talking about younger kiddos, you talked about the 8-year-old sibling, is when siblings ask what they should tell their friends, right? And, we talked about the privacy and the sibling who went through the evaluation, owning their story. How do you have that discussion?
Yeah. So I think this is really important that you're letting kids know that this information is our family's private information. So it's not something to, talk to everybody about. And if you want to talk with somebody about it, like your best friend, maybe there's a family we're really close to, it's really important that you ask me first before you share. So you are holding some very valuable, important information that we trust you with. And it's our family's information. And that keeps it as, the other siblings' private information, and kind of on that theme of respect for the diagnosed child, that it's their information and their narrative. So we can make those decisions as a family of who needs to know, who is really important. But kids need something to tell their friends, because a lot of times the friends come over and the friends say, like, why does your sibling do X? Or the sibling is having a meltdown when the other friends are over. I mean, so often, friends come over and then whichever sibling is not having a friend has a really hard time. So happens with all kinds of siblings. And so having something to say, I think, is really, really important. Something that is concise, concrete, and would answer the questions. And so one example might be something like, like my brother's really sensitive when things change. So sometimes he can get overwhelmed. We can help by giving him some space. So if there's something that happened, or, when we're playing at a play date, we can let my sibling know what toys they can play with. It helps him to have his own toys or something, like that. That's very, very concrete. Or having some like stand up for my sibling kind of phrases, like, really listening to what kinds of things the friends are saying. And if they're curiosity questions, that's great. We can answer with information. If they're things like, why is your sister so weird? Then we can say like, you're not allowed to talk about my sister in that way. Or to say something like, like my sister is, amazingly creative, and I could see how sometimes that comes off as odd, but I don't see it that way. Things that are, at the child's age and are really, ways that we can help them and empower them to stand up for their sibling, to answer their friends with information. And to say, I don't like it when you use those words to talk about my sibling, but, like sometimes he just gets overwhelmed, or sometimes change is hard, or sometimes he just has ideas that are way outside of the box. Mm-hmm. And I don't see it the way you see it.
Right. And I think, providing support for the sibling is so important. And then I love the descriptive language you use. My brother gets overwhelmed when things change. And then it helps the friend understand the behavior that they're responding to. But it also helps the sibling to be helpful in helping explain the behavior.
Right. And I think it's really important that this is not 100% the sibling's responsibility. Kids say unexpected, strange, and sometimes unfortunately hurtful things. And just to say, like, if you're caught, ask me for help. Ask an adult for help. Say, just to empower them to walk away and say, like, I don't let anybody talk about my sibling like that, and walk away, and then ask for help and say, I need some other language for this particular thing, because we are working with really young kids. The siblings are young too. They get overwhelmed, and we want to make sure that they have a plan for keeping this information as their siblings' information, but helping them to really be helpful supporters, and feel confident in their own world.
Yes. As you talk about sharing information with siblings and helping them to process, how brains are different and how their sibling's brain processes information differently, it's a lot of information for young people to take in. And that's why you often say it's not just one conversation. I think you said that during this conversation. It's an ongoing process. And I think that's important to share with parents as well. And that will also evolve as those children mature and change, and they go from elementary school to middle school and middle school to high school. So the conversation can never be one and done. It's going to be constantly evolving.
Yeah. I mean, I think of it as these conversations, they're not an event, they're a journey. And so we don't have to be afraid about not giving them all the information, because we're just giving them taking one more step on that journey. It's just a little nugget that is going to help them with the next thing that's in front of them. And kids are so right now. They're so in the right now. And so giving them kind of the treatise on what is ADHD and how did it evolve is not going to be helpful. But how do we solve this problem that's right in front of our faces? That's going to be really, really helpful. And we have so many tools to keep that conversation going. I mean, I really encourage families to look at all the resources I've collected on the website. So at explainingbrains.com, there's a parents tab. And it has language for talking about different diagnoses that you can share with the child themselves or siblings to really talk about those highways and construction projects that they are working on. And we have a new book called Our Brains. And Our Brains actually leads the child who does have the diagnosis through the process of understanding their highways. There's places for them to draw and write and get really creative. There's places for parents to write in their own highways and construction projects. So we're normalizing that brain. And then we have all the language we need to talk to siblings, and we can actually show siblings their book to say, hey, I want to show you with some great visuals and pictures, some things about your sibling's brain. And that can often be, once they've kind of gotten it down on paper and see it for the diagnosed child, they often will feel a lot more comfortable, about, this is what neurodiversity means for me. This is what, being neurodivergent, this is how it shows up for me.
Right. And I love that you wrote this book, that you have this book for families. I mean, you've got such great resources on your website. And I think that just helps siblings who learn best through stories and visuals and videos. You have all of that information. I'm going to put a link to, is it Our Brains?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Our Brains.
Yeah. Put a link to that so that people can pick it up, because oftentimes we have these conversations like we're having right now, and then parents will sit down with the sibling and then be like, I don't know what to say, or I don't know, how to follow up with this. But I love that you provide that guidance, because after the clinician has the conversation with the sibling, that sibling goes home and has tons of other questions, that they did not think about when they were sitting with the clinician like yourself. And so parents need to be able to feel comfortable providing that additional support and guidance.
Yeah, I want parents to be really comfortable in the language of neurodivergence and the language of this positive, empowering language of diagnosis, so that we can really help all the kids in the family create a really positive, empowered narrative about how their different brains work, and understanding how each family member's brain works a little bit differently.
Yes, this has been such an important conversation and an important addition to all of the work that you're putting out there. Like I said to you before we hit record, I think that your work has been instrumental in a shift that has taken place in the work that all of us do as clinicians, in the conversations parents are having with their kids, that educators are having about the way they discuss the students in their classroom. And I know that listeners are going to want to learn more about you and your work and the resources you provide families and clinicians. How can they connect with you, Dr. Liz?
Yeah, so thank you for all of that. That's just so kind. You can learn more about me and find all the resources at explainingbrains.com. And there's resources for parents, resources for practitioners, and just a ton to help you with your practice.
Wonderful. Thanks again for being here. I really appreciate you and all the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me. This conversation is such an important reminder that when we support one child, we're actually supporting an entire family system. And siblings are not just bystanders in a neurodivergent family. They are participants, interpreters, and future narrators of their family story. And when we give them language, we give them understanding. And when we give them understanding, we give them empathy. And when we give them empathy, we strengthen the entire family ecosystem. Be sure to check out the show notes to learn more about Dr. Angoff, her work, and the incredible resources she provides families and clinicians, including her new book, Our Brains. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.